Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. When photographer Harry George Hall began reading about fen skating, he decided to make his way to rural Cambridgeshire to see it for himself. Despite a number of failed attempts through flooded roads and darkness, the perfect weather conditions suddenly prevailed. Fen skating takes place when a meadow floods and then freezes over, so the ice is very shallow in places just a few centimetres, unlike frozen lakes. After subscribing to weather alerts for obscure corners of East Anglia, says Mr. Hall, I made many trips to fen skating hotspots to find thin or melted ice, rain or flooded roads. He found no signs of skaters or a wonky telegraph pole, often referred to in fen skating circles, but I knew when the conditions aligned it would be worth it. This was a very niche thing to do to capture precisely because the conditions had to be perfect. Then one day he struck fen skating gold. As I pulled out, there was this golden winter sun, that first hard frost, everything I could want with the biggest budget in the world was here naturally now. It was humbling. What followed became a collection of images Mr. Hall, who grew up in Suffolk, hopes were kept in local archives of this time in this place. As a photographer and a director, these always fascinated by people, Mr. Hall said. So this wasn't just about skating, it was about the personalities. This little congregation of people, there are 74-year-olds out there. It is freeing, calm and peaceful. There's nothing technical about it. They rely on nothing but the environment and the weather. It's not around for long. Someone told me it's a great metaphor for life. The ice will melt and in the summer this will be a dust bowl. Then there is a wonky telegraph pole in the centre that has become a beacon for fen skaters gathering. It's been there for years. You hear them before you see them. The sound reverberates, bouncing down the fen. Then there's that scraping sound. People are really enjoying themselves. When you take your camera out, people can be suspicious, but it's a beautiful thing. Even the sight of their belongings on the side. It can be demoralising trying to find them at first. It's not all laid out for you. You have no control over it. I'd travelled to a few different spots like Welney and Sutton Galt near Willingham, but the weather wasn't right. The fen was too flooded, but I rejoiced when I found them. Looking back at it now, it's very rare for these conditions to be right for a photographer. That canvas. When I put the pictures out, everyone had a story, a grandparent or a great-grandparent who did it. I think it's so important that things like this are documented. It is so historical. It is telling a story. You're getting across the humanity of life. It is an amazing snapshot of what it's like to live, to be in this condition. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. Green claims made in advertising for households basics such as washing up liquid are to be scrutinised to see if they are misleading. The Competition and Markets Authority, CMA, says it is concerned consumers are paying a premium for products that aren't what they seem. It will examine the accuracy of environmental claims on goods such as cleaning products and toiletries. CMA boss Sarah Cardell says she is concerned companies are greenwashing. This is when a firm exaggerates its environmental credentials for marketing purposes. As more people than ever try to do their bit to help protect the environment, we're concerned many shoppers are being misled and potentially even paying a premium for products that aren't what they seem, especially at a time when the cost of living continues to rise, Ms. Cardell said. She said it would be looking at both big and small firms' products to see if the environmental claims they made were true. The investigation will also look into the accuracy of green claims made about food and drink. The CMA said last year's shoppers spent £130 billion on household essentials. It said a significant number of household products are marketed as green or environmentally friendly, including almost all dishwashing items and toilet products. The watchdog said it was worried about a number of areas, including products that used vague and broad statements, such as claiming packaging is sustainable or better for the environment, with no evidence. It was also looking at claims of the use of recycled or natural materials in products, as well as whether entire ranges are being incorrectly branded as sustainable. In July last year, the CMA began examining some clothing and footwear collections by fashion retailers over green claims. They include ASOS's Responsible Edit, Boohoo's Ready for the Future range, and George for Good, the clothes brand sold by Asda. The watchdog said the criteria companies use to include clothing in so-called sustainable collections might be lower than shoppers might reasonably expect. For example, some products may contain as little as 20% recycled fabric, it said. The CMA began examining the way that companies used eco-friendly descriptions and labels to promote goods and services in November 2020. It found that more and more shoppers wanted to help the environment through buying what they thought were green products, but the CMA was concerned it could lead some businesses to make misleading, vague or false claims. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. Housing campaigners hope a Supreme Court ruling to legally define who should be deemed a landlord will help protect tenants in some of England's worst rental properties. They are concerned about a practice known as rent to rent, which allows a company to rent a whole home from a landlord and let rooms individually for profit. They say this often leaves properties in poor conditions and tenants with nowhere to turn. fair. They also believe some owners are using such companies to avoid legal responsibilities and make it hard for tenants to track them down. But some property owners say they are too being deceived by the same rogue operators. Rent to rent is not illegal, and those who promote it say it brings down rents by giving tenants the option of renting single rooms rather than whole homes. Some property owners like it because it means they can rent out buildings without having to personally manage them. The Supreme Court is now looking at whether a tenant's landlord is who they sign their contract with, possibly a company, or whether it is the property's owner. Currently, a tenant can only take action against their immediate landlord, says Al McClaragan from the not-for-profit organisation Justice for Tenants. That creates a real blueprint for property owners to put a sham company on the tenancy agreement and cram as many tenants in as possible. He says there are cases of such companies ignoring minimum standards for human habitation and fire safety rules. It's a question of when, not if, there will be a number of people dying in one of these death trap properties. It is hoped that the court ruling in the coming weeks will help people like Jess, who rented a home in a flat in London for her and her partner. It was in a general state of disrepair, she says. There were mice in the kitchen and animal footprints on the beds when we first moved in. The door to our room didn't have a lock, which meant we couldn't leave anything valuable there. Jess says it was not just unclean, it was dangerous too. The shared bathroom was giving off electric shocks around the shower, and we didn't have a fire door either. Even when things did get fixed, Jess said it all took so much time, she could only communicate with her landlord by text message. Jess also discovered the flat, because it was shared by 5 or more individual tenants, should have had a house of multiple occupancy HMO license in place, but it didn't. Eventually, after moving out of the property 2 years ago, she and her housemates came together to try to get their rent back at a tribunal. We've had no idea who to pin it down to. It was like chasing a ghost, she says of her landlord. They are not physically there. Jess and 4 of her old flatmates applied for a rent repayment order, and the tribunal ruled in their favour, but it was complicated with multiple parties named as being liable. She has not had any of her money back. The owner of the property told us she doesn't manage the flat where Jess lived and is appealing against the basis for the tribunal's findings. The person who Jess dealt with as her landlord didn't respond to our request for a comment. The National Residential Landlord Association, NRLA, argues that owners should not be responsible if a company lets out a property and mismanages it. David Smith from JMW Solicitors is making their case to the Supreme Court. Of course, landlords should be responsible about who they let to, but there are simply things they can't control, he says. Property owners shouldn't be held liable if a rent-to-rent company has become the de facto landlord and lied to them. What do you expect from them to do? It is not possible for them to stop that. In cases like these, he concedes it is a difficult situation for both owners and tenants, but says owners should not be liable for compensation. Just because both parties are victims doesn't mean landlords should be held accountable. Iranian and Russian hackers are targeting British politicians and journalists with espionage attacks, officials have warned. The National Cyber Security Centre has issued a fresh alert about increasing attempts to steal information from specific groups and individuals. NCSC said the hackers usually target those doing research and work about Iran and Russia. It described the hacking groups as ruthless in pursuing their targets. The NCSC, which is part of UK's Cyber and Intelligence Agency GCHQ and gives cybersecurity advice, explained the attacks were not targeting the public but specific individuals and groups including politicians, officials, journalists, activists and think tanks. The hackers will often impersonate real contacts to build trust and send fake invites to events or Zoom meetings containing malicious code. If clicked on, they can compromise accounts, allowing the hacker to gain access to sensitive information. NCSC Director of Operations Paul Chichester said these campaigns by threat actors based in Russia and Iran continue to ruthlessly pursue their targets in an attempt to steal online credentials and compromise potentially sensitive systems. We strongly encourage organisations and individuals to remain vigilant to potential approaches and follow the mitigation advice in the advisory to protect themselves online. The number of individuals targeted in the UK is small, in the tens, with minimal impact, officials say, but organisations have been asked to secure their online accounts and report suspicious approaches. Officials are not formally accusing Russian and Iran of involvement in the espionage, although 2 hacking groups they are warning about are widely believed to be linked to the 2 states. A Russian group known as Seaborgium or Cold River has previously been linked in media reports to the leaking of emails belonging to ex-MI6 head Sir Richard Dearlove and the targeting of US nuclear laboratories. Google has said the group has also targeted US think tanks, a Ukraine-based defense contractor, and the military of multiple Eastern European countries. An Iranian group known as TA453 or Charming Kitten has been linked by independent cybersecurity experts to the country's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and is accused of targeting US politicians as well as critical infrastructure. The campaigns are separate and not the result of collaboration, but the joint warning is being issued because they rely on similar techniques and targets. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. With the cost of living crisis, the price of alcohol has increased along with so many other products. It's prompted some to turn their backs on boozy weekends and nights out, opting for sobriety over spending. Student Grace Burton says she would spend up to £60 on a night out, and since she stopped drinking in October, she has more to spend elsewhere. And it's not just a financial choice. She and others who have gone sober say their well-being has also improved. As a student especially, I felt like so much of my student loan was going towards going out and socializing, says 22-year-old Grace, and a lot of that was drinking. Figures show that the amount you spend on a night out is increasing at its fastest rate since 1991, with all alcohol prices on the up. For Grace, the £50 to £60 she'd spend in pubs, bars and clubs could buy her 2 weeks worth of groceries. That's huge. The third-year University of Bristol student says she's embarrassed to think of how much she would spend on nights out, which she realised she wasn't enjoying. You'd wake up and check your bank account and realise that you'd bought a lot of vodkas for a bunch of people you don't know. I really appreciate not having that anymore. She says most of her friends supported her decision to go sober, but it made her realise how ingrained drinking is in society, particularly at university. There's such like a prickliness to it sometimes. She says about when she explains she's not drinking, but alcohol-free alternatives help her feel like she's not missing out. As well as freeing up more cash to cushion rising prices, Grace, who is originally from Canterbury, says she is also able to spend more time on things she enjoys like meals out with friends. That money's probably still being spent, but it's just being redirected and spent in a nicer way. By not going out, artist and DJ So Shah says she could save enough money a month for 3 big shops. Shah grew up in the Philippines, and after discovering a love of electronic music, she ran her own nightclub there in her early 20s before moving to the UK. Performing in bars and clubs, Shah says alcohol was part and parcel of what I do, and she noticed she was using it as a crutch. I'm the party starter, it was my job, literally I'm the party promoter, she says, so when she decided to quit drinking, it was very confusing for some of my friends. While money wasn't the main reason she decided to stop drinking, she says she can't believe how much she's saving as a result. For both Shah and Grace, giving up sparked questions from their friends, but generally they say people have been supportive of their decisions. There's a sense of I'm going to be different, I'm going to be left out, Shah says, but some people were like, actually, you know what, me too. Before going sober, Shah spent hundreds every month on drinking, but also on getting ready for nights out, buying new outfits and getting hair and nails done. When alcohol is involved, usually it's an event. For 10 months, Shah was homeless in London, relying on house sitting for somewhere to stay. She says struggling to pay her rent took a toll on her mental health. Now living in Norwich, she says going sober has also helped her improve her well-being and has made her question her spending more generally. I see a ripple effect in terms of, do I really need to buy this thing? For example, buy this dress, buy the shoes, and then you save money, she says. Millie Gooch was 26 when she also decided to stop drinking in 2018. But like Grace, it was at university when she started to reconsider her relationship with alcohol. I was your classic party girl binge drinker, she says. I often wouldn't remember a lot of my night. Stopping drinking was a lonely experience, and after struggling to find a community she felt she would suit, Millie decided to set up her own, and now Sober Girl Society has almost 200,000 followers on Instagram. I really wanted a space where we could discuss non-alcoholic wine or how do you go on a date sober. So I started it and it just blew up from there. I never expected that it was going to be this bigger thing or it was going to be my full-time job. Sober Curious, these are tips, examples for cutting out the booze. Before going out, set a limit for how much you're going to spend on drink and a budget for the spending on the alcohol. Tell your friends and family that you're trying to cut down. Take it steady, try cutting back a little more every time you drink, and mix up your habits, order a small glass or a half a pint instead, and alternate alcoholic drinks with soft ones. Melise says she's noticed an uptick in the number of people cutting down on drinking as a result of the cost of living crisis. Pubs have reported this too, with reports that a combination of inflation, staff shortages, and lower customer spending may leave pubs and bars struggling to survive. We're definitely noticing that it is one of the things to go because it is just getting more and more expensive for people. I think what they're realizing is that they really need to look at where they're spending their money, and they are spending on things that really make them happy. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. Aircraft giant Boeing will answer a fraud charge in court later over 2 plane crashes which killed 346 people. Both accidents were down to flaws in the flight control systems on the 737 MAX aircraft. Boeing was found to have failed to disclose information about the system, but avoided a trial by agreeing to pay $2.5 billion, £1.8 billion in fines and compensation. Relatives of those who died are trying to reopen the settlement. It means that for the first time, the company will be formally charged in court in relation to the 2 crashes and will have to plead guilty or not guilty. Boeing has previously opposed reopening the agreement with the US Department of Justice, the DOJ, DOJ, saying to do so would be unprecedented, unworkable, and unequitable. It declined to comment on the arrangement. Boeing 737 MAX aircraft were cleared to fly again in the US in 2020 and the UK and EU in 2021 after being grounded following the crashes in 2019. It is nearly 4 years since Ethiopian Airlines flight ET302 crashed minutes after taking off from Addis Ababa to Nairobi. 157 people died when it plunged into farmland outside the Ethiopian capital in March 2019. The accident involved a new design of aircraft, the 737 MAX. Just months earlier, an almost identical aircraft operated by the Indonesian carrier Lion Air had crashed into the Java Sea on what should have been a routine flight from Jakarta to Pangkal Pinang. 189 passengers and crew lost their lives. It later emerged that both accidents were triggered by design flaws, in particular the use of flight control software known as MCAS. The system was designed to assist pilots familiar with previous generations of 737 and prevent them from needing costly extra training in order to fly the new models. But sensor failures caused it to malfunction, and in both cases it forced the aircraft into a catastrophic dive the pilots were unable to prevent. Investigations in the US revealed that Boeing had not included information about the MCAS system in pilot manuals or training guidance and had deliberately sought to downplay the impact of the system in its communications with the US regulator, the Federal Aviation Administration. In January 2021, the US Department of Justice, DOJ, charged Boeing with fraud, but the company was able to avoid going to trial by agreeing to pay $2.5 billion in fines and compensation, and promising to tighten up its compliance procedures. This settlement, known as a deferred prosecution agreement, provoked intense anger among a number of the relatives of those who died aboard ET302. They claimed and continue to claim that the deal was a sweetheart arrangement, which was concluded without their knowledge, violated their rights, and allowed the company to avoid being held fully accountable. The Department of Justice defended its decision, insisting that the settlement was appropriate because it could not prove beyond reasonable doubt there was a direct connection between Boeing's alleged crimes and the two crashes. The hearing later follows more than a year of legal wrangling in a Texas court, where the families are attempting to have the agreement reopened. Boeing has been ordered to send an appropriate person to appear on its behalf. It is not clear who this person will be. Meanwhile, relatives of the victims who will be allowed to read impact statements to the court or have such statements read out on their behalf. There's no doubt that for the families, including those living in the UK, the arrangements hearings themselves are a major milestone. Zipporah Korea's father, Joseph Watahaika, was killed in the crash of ET302, and she has been a vocal campaigner for Boeing to be held to account ever since. She'll be in Texas for the hearing and says her statement will be a tribute to an incredible man who changed many lives. It feels like we're finally being seen, she said. It feels like the death of our loved ones of 346 people at least have a level of relevance now. Mark Pegram, whose son Sam was working for a refugee agency when he died on the same plane, has been unable to travel to Texas, but he said he was very glad that the hearing is taking place. To us, a fine and cover-up is not justice. It is important a precedent is set to prevent similar loss of innocent lives, and for Boeing to understand the horrific impact their misconduct has had on so many families. It is still far from clear whether the legal action will ultimately lead to the deferred prosecution agreement between Boeing and the DOJ being reopened. Such a move would be highly unusual, but according to Robert A. Clifford, a Chicago lawyer representing the families, in a separate civil action, it could have far-reaching consequences, including action against individuals. These families want the maximum penalty imposed against Boeing, and they want any community from prosecution that senior officials at Boeing received to be lifted. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. A ban on the sale and use of laughing gas in England and Wales is being considered by the government. The proposed ban of nitrous oxide, which can have damaging side effects, is part of a drive to tackle antisocial behaviour. The Home Office has asked for the findings of a report into the harm caused by laughing gas to be delivered sooner than planned. It says in turn it will consider this review before making a decision. Nitrous oxide is one of the most commonly used drugs among 16 to 24-year-olds in England, the government says. Heavy, regular use can lead to a range of side effects, which include dizziness, weakness in the legs, and impaired memory. Inhaling the gas directly from a large canister can be fatal. Current legislation bans the knowing or reckless supply of nitrous oxide for inhalation, but there have been calls for a ban on all direct consumer sales as part of a tightening up of the the law. The Times, which first reported the story, said that under the proposals, exemptions would be allowed for those with legitimate reasons, such as chefs using it for whipped cream or for pain relief in hospitals. The paper said Chris Phil, the policing minister, wanted a review already underway into nitrous oxide by the Independent Advisory Council on the misuse of drugs to be fast-tracked to April, with suggestions a formal announcement on a ban could be made as part of the government's antisocial behaviour strategy due later this year. Emma Kane, who lost a son after he inhaled butane in 2011, said she tries to stop other youngsters in the street who she sees inhaling volatile substances to warn them about the dangers. I tell them, this is my son, he's in a box, stop doing it, you're hurting yourselves. The Times reported that punishment for being caught with or selling nitrous oxide is likely to be similar to sanctions for Class C drugs. Those in possession face up to 2 years in prison, or an unlimited fine and a maximum 14 years sentence for supplying or producing the substance. So what is laughing gas? Widely sold in small metal canisters, nitrous oxide is a colourless gas used as a propellant, for example in whipped cream dispensers. Hospitals and dental practices also use big canisters of it as an anaesthetic that patients inhale. Some of those who misuse the substance, sometimes referred to as hippie crap, inhale it via a balloon or use a dispenser or cracker. Heavy, frequent use can lead to a vitamin deficiency that can cause serious permanent nerve damage and lasting paralysis. But inhaling the gas directly from a large canister is particularly dangerous and can be fatal because it is under such high pressure and comes out extremely cold, which can damage the throat and lungs, halt breathing, and slow the heart to a dangerous level. The law already bans the knowing or reckless supply of nitrous oxide for inhalation under the Psychoactive Substances Act. But in October, the British Compressed Gases Association wrote to Ms. Braverman asking for a ban on all direct consumer sales. The drug is widely perceived as lower risk than alcohol, but researchers have raised concerns over the long-term harm it could cause among chronic users. A study comparing the harms of laughing gas to other recreational substances found it was considered more harmful than poppers for drug-related dependence, environmental damage, and relative impairment of mental functioning, while poppers were more harmful for drug-related mortality, injury, and damage. In the year ending June 2022, 3.9% of 16 to 24-year-olds reported using nitrous oxide, equivalent to about 230,000 people, according to the Crime Survey for England and Wales. In September, Home Secretary Suella Braverman called for the review into harm caused by nitrous oxide. And earlier this month, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak addressed the issue in a speech about antisocial behaviour and the blight of discarded nitrous oxide canisters in children's playgrounds. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. The town of Blackburn in Lancashire, with its high number of low-income households, is one of the areas hardest hit by the cost of living crisis. The BBC's Alex Forsyth met people there to find out how they are pulling together to help each other through. On a freezing morning in Blackburn, the volunteers at St Ivy Street Community Centre are determined to keep the atmosphere warm. They sort through trays of fresh food laid out on trestle tables, putting vegetables, pies and packets of porridge into bags ready for people in the neighbourhood who are struggling to get by. Christine Connell, who runs the centre, has been working in the local community for 37 years and says the need seems greater than ever. I see the worry, she says. When somebody's got no gas or electric and they're freezing, I give it to them out of my own pocket. I see poverty, a lot of poverty. Every Tuesday, the free food parcels are either collected or delivered by Christine and her team. When you go round, you can see the tears in their eyes. If it's someone with a baby, we have nappies, it's sanitary wear, the basics. And people are struggling that are working. You wouldn't think somebody working would need help, but they do because their bills are so high. Inflation has affected people right across the UK, but according to the Centre for Cities think tank, places like Blackburn, where people on lower wages spend more of their income on food and fuel, have been hit particularly hard. A 5-minute drive from the community centre, a singing session is underway at Albion Mill, an extra care housing facility that opened shortly after the pandemic. Run by the local branch of Age UK, the Talk and Tunes group is open to residents and people living nearby to provide free companionship and support. For 82-year-old Valerie, who lives alone, it is a chance to get out of her home without spending money. All the food is going up, she says. It's getting too much. I only get a state pension. It's taking the biggest part of that, and then I have to pay my rent and there's no money left. You can't go out. You've got to sit in your own four walls, and I don't like it. I think life is for living. I've got MS and it does hold me back, but I still want to live. The Blackburn with Darwin branch of Age UK says the demand from people seeking support from its local advice service between April and September last year increased by 80% compared with the same period the year before, mostly related to people struggling with money. One of the things we're trying to do is reach people who wouldn't usually come for advice and support, says Chief Executive Vicky Shepherd. Those people who have been managing and were okay they are now really being impacted by the increased costs because most pensioners lived on a fixed income. The government has provided support to households and businesses to help with spiralling energy bills and made extra funding available to councils to give to the most vulnerable people through what's called the Household Support Fund. In Blackburn, Jubilee Tower Credit Union is one of the local organisations that helps allocate that pot of money. In the past 9 months, it's given out 5,700 payments, totaling more than £500,000. Chairwoman Janice Parker says people are actively making choices between heating their homes and eating. She adds they're worried about the fact direct debits for fuel costs have gone up and whether or not they can afford them. We're getting people who have their own houses, they have good jobs, but they still need that support. On one level, I feel angry, on one level, quite sad, but I think frustration is the biggest area. We are very lucky here in Blackburn with Darwin that we have so many different organisations working together. With demand so high, Blackburn with Darwin Borough Council has ramped up a helpline which originally set up during the COVID pandemic, bringing in staff from across the organisation to answer the phones. In one of its call centres, 5 council workers wearing headsets are talking and making calls to people who've applied for extra support. On average, about 300 phone calls are made and received each week. Emma Mercer is one of the council's community connectors who describes what one woman told her. She's got £3.40 left on her meter at the moment and her daughter has an eating disorder and she can't afford food properly, she says. So we're going to try and get her a bit of food, help her with her utilities a little bit. Emma says it can be tough listening to the circumstances some people are facing. You can hear it in their voices when they're speaking to you that they're not used to reaching out for help. It's exceptionally difficult to hear that type of thing, but at the same time, you know you're doing something for them, even if it's getting them a little bit of food and making sure they can put the gas on to cook their food. The council can offer money to people who are eligible using funding that the government has made available, but resources are finite, so they also refer people to one of the organisations working across Blackburn to plug the gaps. They can provide food, furniture and white goods or help and advice managing finances and household bills. Shuab Khan runs the Bangor Street Community Centre, which has just started a weekly warming event, offering free food and a warm space to anyone living nearby. On the first evening, about 100 people turned up within the first hour. The idea was to get people out of their homes to save energy and to give people a free meal, Shuab says. Sisters Mahak, 15 and 12-year-old Kiran arrived with their aunt. It just feels like you're part of some big family, to be honest, Kiran says. You're surrounded by people who you know and just people who really understand you. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. Nearly 1/3 of all the UK's public charging devices for electric vehicles are located in London. New government data shows 8,680 new charging devices were installed nationwide in the past year, increasing the total by 31%. But some regions are lagging behind, with the lowest rates seen in Northern Ireland and the northwest of England. The government said it had invested more than £2 billion to support the switch to electric vehicles. As of 1st of January 2023, there were 37,055 public electric vehicle charging devices installed in the UK, up 31% from a year before. That is according to data provided to the Department for Transport, DfT, by electric vehicle charging mapping service ZapMap. Ciara Cook, Research and Policy Officer at New Automotive, a not-for-profit organisation supporting the UK's transition to electric vehicles, said there was a greater need for public charging devices in urban environments such as London. She said areas like this had a lot more people that don't have access to off-street charging. The government released data also shows that the West Midlands saw the biggest increase, with charging devices up 53% since January 2022, followed by Wales. London has by far the most charging devices of any region or nation in the UK, with 131 devices per 100,000 people. In England, the Northwest had the fewest charging devices, with only 31 per 100,000 people. The government has made £450 million available to local authorities for electric vehicle infrastructure projects, of which a fraction has been awarded. Ms. Cook added that it was important local authorities prioritised charging infrastructure to help make sure that it makes economic sense to change an electric vehicle. A spokesperson for the local government association, LGA, which represents 350 councils in England and Wales, said electric vehicles were only one way of achieving cleaner transport. They said that investment in cleaner and better bus networks and safer cycling and walking infrastructure were also important. Whilst it's not a statutory duty, councils will do what they can, where they can, in partnership with the private sector to respond to growing demand and local priorities. The government is aiming for there to be 300,000 charging devices in the UK by 2030. Almost a third of chargers in the UK are located on residential streets. Only 6% are located at places mid-journey, such as motorway service service areas or service stations. But the latest available data suggests the number of vehicles that can use charging devices is growing at a faster rate than available charging points, including all types of plug-in vehicle, such as battery, electric, and hybrid. There were 1,003,000 electric vehicles in the UK as of September 2022. That is up 54% from 1 year before, compared with a 31% increase in charging devices. A Department for Transport spokesperson said, "We want to maximise the opportunities available for motorists to switch to electric vehicles, which we've supported by investing more than £2 billion. Today, a driver is never more than 25 miles away from a rapid charge point anywhere along England's motorways and major A roads." Hello and welcome to News by Standards. We made sure we were all in one place so there's only one LED light on, says Lisa, who lives in Bedfordshire with her family. "We turned everything off at the plugs." Lisa was one of the hundreds of thousands of people who took part in Monday's scheme to reduce pressure on electricity supplies. She'll be paid a bonus of around £10 by her electricity provider as a reward and will join again on Tuesday. The National Grid is paying people to cut back on their electricity use at peak times to try to reduce demand. Cold, still weather means less electricity is generated by wind power, and when people come home from work and children come home from school, the heating, the oven and kettle go on and demand for electricity soars. So National Grid via electricity suppliers is rewarding people like Lisa who manage to trim back their usage on days when the pressure on the system is highest. On Monday it ran the scheme for the first time properly, following a series of test days. The scheme is running again on Tuesday between 4:30 p.m. and 6 p.m. National Grid said at the launch of the scheme that households could save up to £100 in total if the scheme ran on 12 days over the winter, but many people will not be able to achieve the scale of savings to earn that much. The scheme rewards you according to how much you cut back compared to your typical use. Households that usually use very little electricity have less scope to cut back and less opportunity to earn large bonus payments. Lisa and her family are already quite careful with their energy use, but on Monday they still managed to cut back by about 3 kilowatt hours, she thinks, compared to a normal day. They'll find out in a few days how much their bonus will be, but if she is right, they'll be paid around £10. To make the savings, they switched off the dehumidifier, the TV and the heat pump, which uses electricity to heat their home. Laptops were fully charged ahead of time so her sons could keep doing their homework, and they waited until after the savings window was over at 6 p.m. to make dinner. And far from being a difficult exercise, Lisa says it felt good, even to have her 2 teenage sons. They're both concerned about climate change. The news explained that if people didn't cut back, the coal-fired power stations might come online, so they're very up for it. Steve in Horsham made even more. He will receive £12 in points on his account that he can take off his energy bill or cash out. He and Lisa are both with Octopus, which is offering the scheme to all its customers, and says 400,000 people opted to take part on Monday. "We read our books for an hour instead of cooking dinner, but by far the biggest saver was switching off the electric radiators that heat his flat. We weren't really cold because we had them on, then switched them off at 5 p.m, then put them back on about 7. On Tuesday, Octopus is offering an even higher rate of reward, £4 per unit of energy saved, up from the £3.37 they offered on Monday. But even at those prices, some people will not get rewards in the region of £10 to £12. If you normally use very little electricity at peak times, you have less room to cut back. Octopus said on Monday the average customer earned £1.25 to £2.50 for the hour. Only the top 5% of participants cut back enough to get more than £8.75. National Grid said it paid £850,000 in total to energy suppliers on Monday to run the scheme. On Tuesday, they expect to spend around £2.1 million. Suppliers will be paid between £3 to £6 per unit of energy saved, but can choose how much of that to pass on to their customers. So how much energy does your appliances currently use? Some washing programs use more energy. Kettles and televisions come in different sizes, so you need to check out your own appliance to see how much it uses. But the Energy Savings Trust provides ballpark figures for how many units of energy measured in kilowatt hours it takes to run a typical model. One load of washing, for example, in the washing machine is 0.5 kilowatt hours. One load in the tumble dryer is 3 kilowatts. One dishwasher cycle is 0.9 kilowatts. Boiling a full kettle is 0.2 kilowatts. And a 4-watt LED light bulb for an hour, roughly 0.004 kilowatts. For Alex Alliston in Gloucestershire, however, the money isn't the point. The semi-retired renewables engineer says the scheme is all about proving that people are willing to change their behaviour. If we can get consumers to turn down their consumption at peak times, we'll burn less of the expensive gas. It's not as dirty as coal, but we're supposed to be greening our system. On Monday, he cooked a fish pie and turned the oven off at 5 p.m. Then he switched off from the electricity grid entirely. He has a battery that can run lights and other low power appliances in his home. He expects there will be a lot more demand management in future and believes that will benefit everyone. For now though, only about 14 million homes, less than half of all households in England, Scotland and Wales, have a smart meter installed. A prerequisite for taking part, and currently some providers are only inviting a proportion of their customers to take part. However, if you have not been invited by your supplier or your supplier has not signed up, Loop, which is a company registered with the National Grid scheme, can provide the service to you. The company offers people a free app which links their smart meter with the aim of helping them understand electricity use and provide ways to use less. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. Leaving social care to become a lorry driver gave one worker a £10,000 pay rise overnight. Dan White, age 40, had loved his job supporting vulnerable adults, while partner Iona Peacock worked in operating theatres for the NHS, but they've both left their jobs for better pay elsewhere. NHS workers have been striking across Wales and the UK as they seek better wages and working conditions, with more action to come. People leaving the profession is just one reason why there were 1,800 patients medically well enough to leave hospital earlier this month, but could not be discharged because there were no staff to care for them in the community. Recent figures also showed all-time record highs in December for ambulance responses, discharge from hospital and handover of patients to A&E times. Both the UK and Welsh governments said there were record numbers of staff working in the NHS, with the Welsh government adding it was committed to improving conditions for care staff. So why are workers such as Dan and Iona leaving social care? It was his own addiction that inspired Dan to work with those experiencing drug and alcohol issues and homelessness. He was part of a hospital-based team tackling the revolving door of admissions from patients with those backgrounds. They'd get obliterated, fall asleep on the pavement, and a member of public would phone an ambulance and they'd get brought in, said Dan from Roos Vale of Glamorgan. There was a big problem with patients being discharged and readmitted within a very short space of time. Sometimes the same day, it was putting a real pressure on beds. He experimented with drugs during his teenage years and was dependent on Class A's by his early 20s. I knew I didn't want to live my life that way, but felt that I couldn't stop, he said, explaining he went in and out of rehab before finding a centre run by those in recovery themselves. The people I met through my various attempts at getting clean really inspired me. It made me realise that this was what I was passionate about and what motivated me. I felt so grateful for what I had received from then. I thought that if all those years causing harm to myself and my family, wider local community and wider society as a whole, if that's going to count for anything, then it's to use that negative, bad experience to do something good. But passion was not enough, he said, citing poor pay and large caseloads as the reason for leaving his role in the Midlands. Dan said in that job, even before the cost of living crisis, I was really struggling. Sometimes I'd be doing the weekly shop on a credit card and paying it off the following month, which then puts you on the back foot for the following month. He found the job very rewarding, adding, if I could earn the same as what I do driving a truck, doing that job, I would go back tomorrow. Many of the pressures felt by the NHS are put down to a shortage of social care staff. On average, there are about 1,200 patients in Welsh hospitals awaiting a care package or assessment before they can be discharged, which has caused record delays in emergency departments as beds are not available for others to be admitted. The domino effect means there are lengthy waits for ambulance and tens of thousands of hours lost every month as crews wait outside hospitals to hand over patients. Waits are not confirmed to urgent care, as there are more than 500,000 patients in Wales waiting for routine treatment, but capacity is limited by the availability of beds and staff. This is something Dan's partner Iona Peacock is well aware of. The 39-year-old works in orthopedic surgery as an operating department practitioner, a type of nursing role supporting either the surgeon, anaesthetist, or on the recovery ward. Originally from Bulgaria, she started working from NHS England in 2003, but left in 2015 to do the same job for more money in the private sector in Cardiff. I worked in a big general hospital, she said, but it was a chaotic department. We changed line managers almost every 6 months, so staff felt under-supported and we didn't retain staff very well. We were running on a skeletal staff. In the private sector, staff retention doesn't seem to be as much of an issue, and when you have a full team, everything seems to run smoothly. As a mum to a teenage daughter and a 10-month-old son, she said she now has a better work-life balance. I have a better pay package and my shifts are not as stressful as they were in the NHS. I have a good management team behind me, and when you have happy people around you, everything runs smoothly, she added. The Royal College of Nursing estimates there are 3,000 nursing vacancies in Wales. Given the legal obligation to safe staffing levels on wards, those vacancies are typically filled by existing staff working longer hours or agency staff. In the past year, the NHS in Wales spent just over £260 million on agency staff, an increase of more than a third on the previous year. There are more staff working in NHS Wales than ever before, the Welsh Government spokesman added. This year we are investing a record £281 million in training and professional education, and almost 400 more nurse training places will be created thanks to an 8% increase we're providing in the NHS Wales training budget. He also said the government is committed to improving conditions for care workers, adding we are investing £70 million to ensure all social care workers continue to get paid at least the real living wage. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. The Prime Minister will gather his cabinet for a mammoth away day at his country retreat Chequers today. As well as the weekly cabinet meeting, ministers will discuss their priorities in political cabinet. Political cabinet involves discussing of strategy. More political officials attend and it's not minuted like official government business. It's the first since Rishi Sunak took office, but as ministers discuss how to turn around a significant poll deficit, there are clouds over the government with more than one member of the cabinet under investigation over their conduct. The Guardian is reporting that Dominic Raab is facing complaints from at least 24 people. We already knew he was facing a bullying probe. The BBC has not verified the Guardian's new figure, but a source close to the process told them they believe it is correct. The government says it won't be giving a running commentary. Mr. Raab told the BBC at the weekend, "I am confident I have behaved professionally throughout, and of course the government takes zero tolerance of bullying." Nadeem Zahawi, the Conservative Party chairman, embroiled in a row over his taxes, will also attend today's meeting. He will have no formal role in the agenda, despite the political focus ahead of May's local elections. It would normally be expected that the chairman would be front and centre in political messaging, particularly in the run-up to an election. But some Conservatives are concerned about the impact the row over his financial affairs is having on the party and the government. Ministers have suggested publicly he will be sacked or have to resign if the PM's ethics advisor finds he has not followed the ministerial code. There are also questions over whether Mr. Sunak should have known more about Mr. Zahawi's situation and the fact he paid a penalty to end a tax dispute before defending him at Prime Minister's questions last week. Sources close to the Prime Minister say he wants to follow the process and let the ethics advisor look into what happened, but Mr. Sunak has also said questions need to be answered and even suggested it would be politically expedient to sack him. While Mr. Sunak has claimed his party after a tumultuous 2022, the PM is finding it hard to escape some of the rows over propriety and standards. That is a political headache, even if some relate to a period before Mr. Sunak became a Prime Minister. The PM has made cleaning up his party's image a key priority. He will be judged on whether he delivers the high bar of integrity and professionalism he promised on the step Downing Street. At Chequers, Downing Street said ministers would be focused on the 5 priority areas set out in Mr. Sunak's New Year's speech, including tackling price rises, growing the economy, cutting NHS waiting times, and stopping small boats crossing the channel. The political cabinet meeting will also have a presentation from the Conservative strategy guru Isaac Levido, one of the masterminds of the party's election victory in 2019. He's back playing a central role in getting Mr. Sunak ready for the next general election, which many in Westminster expect in the latter half of next year. But Mr. Levido may have his work cut out in the coming months, with polls suggesting Labour have a considerable lead over the Conservatives. That and the questions over conduct are the backdrop to today's away day. Oh, to be the fly on the wall. Hello and welcome to News by Standards. A 13-year-old boy has been charged following a string of sexual assaults on women and girls in Telford. Police received 5 reports between 15th of December 2022 and the 19th of January that women and girls aged between 16 and 34 had been targeted in Hadley and Lee Gomery. The boy has been charged with 9 sexual assaults, 2 attempted rapes, and assault by beating. He appeared at Kidderminster Youth Court on Wednesday and was remanded into the care of the local authority. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. A police officer who tried to dodge 2 speeding tickets by getting his wife to take them on his behalf has been jailed for 6 months. PC Mark Hitchcliffe, age 43, was caught on camera twice in 3 months, breaking a 30-mile-per-hour limit in Morley near Leeds. When the couple received the speeding tickets, they claimed it had been his wife Lisa, age 38, also a police employee who had been behind the wheel. A judge said the pair had tried it on because they worked for the police. The Leeds-based officer, who has since resigned from West Yorkshire Police, and his wife, who also left her civilian post, pleaded guilty to 2 offences of perverting the course of justice at a court hearing last November. Passing sentence on Wednesday, Judge Jonathan Rose told the pair, "You thought you could get away with it and thought that people who stand in the dock for these offences were people who were not like you. You are wrong." The judge said he could not, in all conscience, send Lisa Hinchcliffe to jail because of the significant harmful impact it would have on their 2 children, and gave her a 4-month jail term suspended for 2 years. Bradford Crown Court was told that Mr. Hinchcliffe, who was a Safer Schools officer for West Yorkshire Police at the time, had worked for the force for 18 years and had an impeccable record. Prosecutor Richard Walters described how he was caught on camera speeding in Morley while driving driving the couple's VW Passat and Renault Megane vehicles at 37 miles per hour and 36 miles per hour on the same 30 mile per hour road in April and June. After receiving notices of intended prosecution for speeding, his wife declared she had been the driver both times. The court was told she attended a speed awareness course and that the second offence paid a fixed penalty fine and had points put on her licence. However, after an investigation by the Police Professional Standards Board commenced in September, the pair of Moorside Drive, Bradford, were arrested and their mobile phones were seized. Mr. Walters said both phones had extensive messages relating to the speeding offences. He added the Hinchcliffe talks about a new job he's got where he has to visit schools and says he wouldn't be able to visit them if he lost his licence. He also expressed concern because he was worried there was another offence to come, and at that stage Lisa talks about taking 3 points for him. Sarah Barlow, defending the former officer, said going to prison was every officer's worst fear and added, "He's a thoroughly decent man, or was. He feels keenly the fact that he has let everybody down." The judge said Hinchcliffe had let down the police force and his family. He said he had been emboldened by getting away with the first offence and that had encouraged the couple to commit the second offence. Of course, this is always a serious offence and of course a prison sentence will always be passed, and I'm afraid to say Mark Hinchcliffe even more so when it is a serving police officer who does this. Mark Hinchcliffe was also banned from driving for 18 months. His wife was banned for 12 weeks and also ordered to carry out 200 hours of unpaid work. West Yorkshire Police said misconduct investigations would now resume, which could see the couple banned from any policing role in future. Detective Chief Superintendent Nicola Breyer of the Force's Professional Standards Directorate said both the police and public quite rightly expect our officers and staff to abide by the law. Mark Hinchcliffe not only committed criminal offences in the first place by speeding, but when caught he has, alongside his wife Lisa, knowingly tried to commit the criminal justice process. Honesty and integrity are fundamental values of the public service. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. Two convicted murderers from Northern Ireland on the run after absconding while on temporary release from jail have been arrested. Alison McDonagh, age 49, and Stephen McParland, 54, were arrested in the Newry area on Thursday afternoon. Mr. Donagh was imprisoned for a murder committed in 2004. McParland received his conviction for a killing in 1997. They had been last seen at Lanyon Place train station in Belfast at around 1:45 p.m. GMT on Saturday. According to the Department of Justice, Mr. Donagh was on a pre-release scheme and McParland was on pre-released testing. McDonagh, then known as Alison Michelle Martin, was convicted in July 2006 for the murder of 47-year-old George McDowell. Mr. McDowell was stabbed to death in a flat in the Rathcoole estate in Newtown Abbey in July 2004. McParland was convicted in 1998 of the murder of Gary Alexander McKim in an alleyway off the Crenagh Road in East Belfast in January the previous year. His trial was told he had punched, kicked and stamped on Mr. McKim, who had been drinking with in a row over £20 owed by one of them to the other. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. An up-and-coming singer got a support slot on Lewis Capaldi's latest tour after a drunken private message. Rachel Chinuri sent the Scottish star a 1-minute video asking if she could perform at his upcoming stadium shows after a night out. When she woke up the next morning, she realised what she'd done and thought she'd blown her chance. But after a nervous wait, she found out that she'd been added to the bill for his European tour next month. It's all started on Instagram. I got a follow one day off Lewis Capaldi, says Rachel. I'm slightly shocked because obviously it is Lewis. Sometime later, Rachel says she got a notification she'd been tagged in one of Lewis's Insta stories. It was a video of him singing Rachel's song, I'm Not Perfect, But I'm Trying. He's singing my song and he's getting into it, says Rachel. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. Rachel's record label was also thrilled and says they told her to ask Lewis about going on tour, but feeling too embarrassed, she couldn't bring herself to do it. That's until she went on a night out. I must have had quite a few drinks, says Rachel, who was in the back of a car when Lewis's profile popped up on her phone. Her memory of the next part is a bit blurry, but she recalls being egged on by her housemates. I don't know what happened, I just started recording. It did not look like that individual on the video in my brain, says Rachel, who thought she had come across quite cool in the clip. And then the next day I woke up and he was at the top of my DMs, she says. He'd seen it and he did reply. I just went into overdrive. When Rachel's management told her there was a chance she might get to perform with Lewis, she decided to keep quiet about the video. But she spent the next few weeks worrying she'd messed it up. I bet they're all working so hard speaking to his team, and then I'm here sending him drunk videos. But in that time, she noticed Lewis had watched one of her Insta stories. Maybe he doesn't hate me, Rachel thought. So when she found out she would be going on tour with Lewis, she decided to confess to her manager. He thought it was hilarious, she says. If I hadn't got it, I definitely would never have told them, but because I got it, I was like, okay, here's here's the video, and he found it in there. She's since posted the evidence in a Twitter thread which contains some strong language. Rachel, who's due to release her debut album this year, says the opportunity to travel with Lewis will be an amazing boost for her. A lot of music and numbers are done online, she says, but there is such power in the energy and the amount of people you can reach performing live. It's just about being able to see how Lewis can take on such a big stage. It's obviously a dream for so many artists like myself to eventually get to that stage one day. And has her experience taught her anything? Shoot your shot and follow your gut instincts without drinking, she says, because my gut was like, yeah, I should do this, but it shouldn't take me being tipsy to be like, I should do this. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. When the US Congress passed Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act last summer, the bill seemed built on good intentions, designed to boost America's green economy and tackle climate change. The act included billions of dollars of subsidies for the purchase of electric cars and other eco-friendly products, but a provision that those subsidies will only be available to consumers who buy American-made products has enraged many European nations. They see it as a thinly disguised attempt to grab a share of Europe's high-tech manufacturing sector, including Britain's, by luring European companies to relocate factories to the US. Welcome to the global race for dominance of green technology, where the future of the planet and the global economy are entwined in a potentially risky geopolitical game. It is the US and the EU at loggerheads, but some East Asian nations are registering their displeasure too, and some in British businesses are wondering exactly where the UK stands in this growing rout. While most countries subsidize green technology, it was Joe Biden's specific targeting of funds solely for North American-made cars that spooked many allies. People who buy passenger vehicles assembled in America now qualify for a tax credit of up to $7,500 or £6,000. Many European firms were on the list of investors in US car production read out by Joe Biden when he unveiled the Inflation Reduction Act. But it isn't just cars that will be affected. Svein Tore Halsæter, the boss of Norwegian fertilizer manufacturer Yara, told them the US is putting in place a system that provides rewards for sequestering carbon and also for switching to green production at a level that really incentivizes and drives investment. Questions are being asked in many European companies right now. Where are the incentives? Businesses are shutting down, new investments are being made in the US. Meanwhile, the French finance minister Bruno Le Maire told me we shouldn't underestimate the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act. French President Emmanuel Macron has been very clear. First of all, we want to get some concessions from the US administration. We are friends and allies, so we want to get some exemptions. Mr. Le Maire said he would go to Washington with his German counterpart soon to raise these concerns. In fact, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has already held direct discussions with top US senators and members of Congress over the Inflation Reduction Act. Mr. Le Maire also wouldn't rule out the idea of Europe launching its own Buy-European subsidies with green tech in response. Everyone understands that at some point in strategic sectors like green industry, there is a need to invest more and to have a kind of European buyback. Leo Varadkar, leader of Ireland, traditionally the closest US ally in Europe, was more direct. He said his country was not happy about the Inflation Reduction Act. There will have to be a response from the European Union, and that will almost certainly involve providing state aid and subsidies to European businesses. The difficulty with that is you end up in a subsidy war, a subsidy competition. What is clear is that the EU is about to respond to the massive American plan, despite concerns among members about sparking a trade war, and the White House is aware of the issues, having set up a US-EU task force to consider them. So where currently does the UK stand? While the BBC understands that both the business and trade secretaries have raised their concerns with their US counterparts, their precise demands are unclear. The business secretary Grant Shapps says that the UK doesn't need a US-style package of green incentives because the UK is already ahead of the game. Actually, we've done our investment to get renewable energy, which is what the US Inflation Reduction Act is all about. We've done it a decade ago, which is why we just don't need to have the world's largest offshore wind farm. We've got the second largest and the third, the fourth, and we've got another coming along that's bigger still. He's also confident the UK won't be overlooked in what may end up being an EU-US carve-up on this issue. He said he had also spoken to his opposite number in the Biden ministry, climate envoy John Kerry, saying Mr. Shapps says much of what the US is doing is welcome. The bits that actually could affect us, the protectionist bit, they're the edges that need to come off this new bill. What does the US think? The current line from leaders that have discussed the Inflation Reduction Act with their US counterparts is that this will all be an accident, and in drafting this legislation, the US just forgot about Europe and committed an economic half-aggression. The reassurance has been made that this will all be aimed at China and not Europe, but there is no doubt that the heads of major European manufacturers are being turned, and while the needs of net zero do tend towards more of Europe's manufacturing being done in in Europe, and likewise for North America, there is a red line that shouldn't be crossed, according to one European leader. If European export production, investment and jobs start to migrate over the Atlantic, things could get sticky. There's also concern that this won't end up with green technologies. The supply chain bottlenecks sparked by the pandemic have made countries rethink their reliance on East Asia, and not just China, for manufacturing goods. Spades are going into the ground across the EU and the US on new facilities for the production of microchips, with major Western tech manufacturers attracting huge subsidies. Europe calls this strategic autonomy, the Americans call it friend-shoring, or the restoring of supply chains to friendly nations. It signals the redirection of massive flows of investment away from their existing homes at a time when many industries are undergoing a huge transformative change. This process could change the landscape of world manufacturing for a generation. Some in British industry fear an EU-US carve-up, not just over electric cars, but microchips and other critical technologies, and it is clear that the globe which global Britain sought to engage after Brexit has changed significantly, raising quite fundamental strategic questions about Britain's future in the midst of it all. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. Thousands of NHS physiotherapists in England have become the latest group to join the ongoing industrial action over pay in the health service. Members of the Chartered Society of Psychotherapy, CSP, at 30 NHS services, 1 in 7 are staging a 24-hour walkout on Thursday. The walkout will involve both physios and support staff. As with other striking health staff, they will continue to provide care in the most urgent cases. This includes supporting people in critical care, those with severe respiratory problems, and some stroke patients who require urgent physiotherapy. But rehab work and discharge planning and community physio is expected to be disrupted. Claire Sullivan, CSP Director of Employment Relations, said the government must come to the table with something tangible that we can put to our members to prevent more strikes following if there is no progress. We're determined to secure a pay deal that helps our members cope with the cost of living crisis and helps the NHS recruit and retain staff to deliver the services that patients desperately need. Ambulance staff who are members of the Unite Union are also taking industrial action in Northern Ireland on Thursday. It follows strikes by ambulance workers, nurses and other health staff across England and Wales in recent weeks over this year's pay award. Health Secretary Steve Barclay said it was regrettable physios were following other health staff in taking industrial action. He said it was now working with unions to achieve a fair and affordable pay award for next year. Like the other health unions, the strike action is centred on the pay dispute. NHS physios are on the standard NHS contract that applies to all staff, bar doctors and dentists. It has seen NHS workers given an extra £1,400 this year, although some senior and specialist physios would have been given more. It works out as an average rise of 4.75%, but all the health unions have asked for an above-inflation pay rise, arguing the past decade has seen pay fall in real terms. They argue this is a factor in the staffing shortages being seen. 1 in 10 posts of all types is vacant currently in the NHS. But ministers have said such rises would be unaffordable and would fuel inflation. Starting salaries for physios are just above £27,000 in England, the same as it is for nurses. The most experienced physios can earn more than twice that in the NHS, although many combine NHS commitments with private work. This is the first of 3 strikes planned by the CSP, with physios and their support staff in all 7 of the Welsh health boards walking out on the 7th February and physios at another 33 NHS services in England taking action on the 9th February. In all, the CSP has a mandate to take strike action in more than 120 services in England, over half the total. This includes hospital, community and mental health terms. The union represents 3/4 of the 30,000 physios and support staff in the NHS in England. Physios, along with midwives, are the 3rd largest part of the workforce after nurses and doctors. They are, the CSP says, essential to every part of the health service. Physiotherapy staff are among unsung heroes and deliver quiet miracles every day to help patients regain function and quality of life, Ms. Sullivan added. While the common image of them is to support patients with sports injuries and joint problems, physios are a core part of many teams in hospitals and in the community. They work in critical care, providing support to patients with breathing difficulties and building up their physical strength. During the height of the pandemic, they played an essential role in caring for COVID patients in intensive care. They also work with patients with respiratory problems, including children with disabilities, along with providing rehab support to patients who have suffered heart attacks and strokes. Becky Portwood, a physio in London, London said she was proud of the work she and her colleagues had done over the pandemic. We were there in intensive care looking after patients. We are a vital part of the workforce. We are in A&E on the ground, so patients don't have to stay too long in hospital. We work all across the NHS. Hello and welcome to News by Standards. There are no penalties for innocent tax errors, the boss of HM Revenue and Customs HMRC has told MPs. Appearing before a Commons committee, Jim Hara was pressed on issues around the tax affairs of Naheed Zahawi. The Conservative Party chairman is facing calls to resign after it emerged he paid a penalty to HMRC. Mr. Hara stressed he could not comment on individual cases, but said penalties were not applied when someone had taken reasonable care. Mr. Zahawi has told HMRC that they accepted the error over previously unpaid tax was careless and not deliberate. He has also insisted he has acted properly throughout. The HMRC chief executive was due to be giving evidence to the Public Accounts Committee about managing tax compliance following the pandemic. However, he also faced questions related to the tax arrangements of Mr. Zahawi, who has come under growing pressure in recent weeks. Whilst he would not comment on specific individuals, Mr. Hara said there are no penalties for innocent errors in your tax affairs. So if you take reasonable care but nevertheless made a mistake, whilst you will be liable for the tax and for interest if it's paid late, you will not be liable for a penalty. But if your error was as a result of carelessness, then legislation says that a penalty could apply in those circumstances. The BBC understands Mr. Zahawi resolved a multi-millionaire pound dispute with HMRC last year when he was Chancellor. According to The Guardian, he paid the tax he had owed as well as a 30% penalty, with the total settlement amounting to £4.8 million. The tax was related to a shareholding in YouGov, the polling company he co-founded in 2000 before he became an MP. Earlier this week, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak asked his independent ethics advisor, Sir Laurie Magnus, to look into whether Mr. Zahawi broke ministerial rules over the issue. Downing Street said it wanted the investigation to be completed as quickly as possible, but that the timeline was a matter for the independent advisor. Mr. Hara said that if HMRC was asked by Sir Laurie to help with the inquiry, we will do so in any way we possibly can. However, he said it would not normally publicly comment on someone's tax affairs, even if the individual had given their consent. During Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accused Mr. Sunak of being hopelessly weak for not firing Mr. Zahawi. In response, the Prime Minister said it would have been politically expedient to sack Mr. Zahawi, but he believed in proper due process and the investigation should be allowed to run its course. Hello and welcome to News by Standards. A trans woman who raped 2 women before she changed gender will not serve her sentence in a female jail, Scotland's First Minister has said. Isla Bryson was remanded to Cornton Vale Women's Prison after being convicted of carrying out the rapes when she was a man called Adam Graham. Bryson decided to transition from a man to a woman while awaiting a trial. Nicola Sturgeon has now said Bryson will be removed from the prison soon and will not serve her sentence there. It is thought to be the first time a trans woman has been convicted of raping women in Scotland. Bryson is due to be sentenced next month after being convicted on Tuesday, but where that sentence should be served has been the subject of heated debate, with concerns being raised about the safety of other women in the jail if Bryson was placed there. The Scottish Parliament passed legislation last month aimed at making it easier for people to change their legally recognised sex, but Ms Sturgeon has said the changes did not play any part in the Bryson case. The Gender Recognition Reform Bill has been blocked by the UK government over its potential impact on equalities laws that apply across Scotland, England and Wales. Speaking at First Minister's questions in the Scottish Parliament, Ms Sturgeon said she agreed with the Chief Executive of Rape Crisis that it was not possible to have a rapist within a woman's prison. Referring directly to the Bryson case, she said, "It would not be appropriate for me, in respect of any prisoner, to give details of where they are being incarcerated. But given the understandable public and parliamentary concern in this case, I can confirm to Parliament that this prisoner will not be incarcerated at Cornton Vale Women's Prison. I hope that provides assurance to the public." The First Minister said any prisoner who posed a risk of sexual offending was segregated from other prisoners, including while a risk assessment was carried out. She said there is no automatic right for a trans woman convicted of a crime to serve their sentence in a female prison even if they have a gender recognition certificate. Every case is subject to rigorous individual risk assessment and the safety of other prisoners is paramount. Ms Sturgeon said she expected that Bryson would not be at Cornton Vale in Stirling by the end of a 72-hour segregated assessment period, which would be soon. The First Minister also stressed it was careful that people did not even inadvertently suggest that trans women pose an inherent threat to women, adding predatory men, as always have been the case, are the risk to women. Speaking to journalists outside the chamber, Ms Sturgeon said she had not given any formal direction to the Scottish Prison Service on removing Bryson from Cornton Vale. Scottish Justice Secretary Keith Brown said on Wednesday that he trusted the prison service to decide on the correct venue for trans prisoners. Cornton Vale was until recently Scotland's only women's jail, but it's being replaced by a series of smaller purpose-built facilities across the country, including a HMP Stirling, which is being built on the same site. Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross said his party had warned for months during the debate over the gender reforms that violent criminals, just like the sex offender, the absolute beast we are discussing today, would try to exploit loopholes in the law and attack a traumatized woman. He added it should not have taken public disgust and a slew of negative headlines about a double rapist being sent to a women's prison for Nicola Sturgeon to realise this was completely unacceptable and wrong. She and her Justice Secretary have the power to impose a blanket ban on all rapists being sent to women's prisons, so why is she refusing to exercise it? It suggests Nicola Sturgeon's screeching U-turn in the Bryson case was down to fears over the political risk to herself rather than the safety risk to women prisoners. It came as Bryson's estranged wife, Shona Graham, aged 31, said she had a lot of sympathy for real trans people, but claimed her former partner's transition was a sham for attention, and that Bryson is attempting to fool the authorities. Miss Graham told the Daily Mail, "Never once did he say anything to me about feeling he was in the wrong body or anything," and accused Bryson of being abusive in their relationship. During the rape trial, Bryson claimed she knew she was transgender at the age of 4, but did not make the decision to transition until she was 29, and is currently taking hormones and seeking surgery to complete gender reassignment. Bryson said that in 2016 she was struggling with bisexuality and having issues emotionally. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. The owner of Royal Mail says the recent wave of strikes at the postal firm have cost it £200 million so far. The row with Communication Workers Union over pay and conditions has led to 18 days of walkouts since August. Royal Mail also said the number of voluntary redundancies it needed to hit job cut targets would be much lower than first expected. The number would be significantly less than the 5,000 to 6,000 it had forecast last year. This was due to a combination of the company cutting the number of agency and temporary workers it used, and also down to staff turnover. Royal Mail is trying to revamp its business as it moves away from delivering letters, which is no longer profitable, to parcel deliveries, which is a growing market thanks to the popularity of online shopping. As well as dealing with the ongoing dispute with the CWU, this month Royal Mail has been trying to tackle problems caused by a cyber attack, which meant it was unable to send letters and parcels overseas. Whilst it is accepting newsletters for overseas delivery, parcel deliveries have been disrupted. On Thursday, Royal Mail said it would resume its international tracked and signed as well as international signed services for parcels and letters to all destinations for business account customers and customers buying postage online. However, it continued to ask customers not to submit any new tracked or untracked standard or economy export parcels into our network just yet. The increasingly bitter dispute with Communication Workers Union CWU has been going on since the summer, and the union has said it will re-ballot for industrial strikes. Like other current industrial action, such as disputes in the NHS and at rail operators, pay is a key issue, with workers seeking wage rises as the cost of living soars. Inflation, the rate at which prices rise, is currently at the highest level of about 40 years. Royal Mail has offered a pay package it says is worth up to 9% over 18 months, but the CWU wants more given the rate of inflation. The union also objects to proposed changes to working conditions, such as ending a number of allowances and the introduction of compulsory Sunday working. Royal Mail owner International Distribution Services, IDS, said that up to 12,500 CWU employees had returned to work on strike days. About 115,000 of these workers had been involved in the walkouts. It is said that robust contingency planning meant it delivered more than 110 million parcels and 600 million letters in December. However, IDS said the letter and parcels business had lost £295 million in the 9 months to the end of December. Revenues in the 9-month period fell 12.8% from the year before. This was partly down to the strike action, but also caused by a continued fall in the number of letters being sent and weaker retail trends. IDS said that despite there having been more strikes than it expected, it still expected annual operating losses to be between 350 million and 450 million for the full year. However, it added this forecast assumed no further days of strike action in the January to March period, and that the CWU accept a pay settlement in line with the best and final pay offer. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. The parents of a girl who died after inhaling aerosol deodorant want clearer product labelling to warn people of the potential dangers. Georgia Green, who is 14 and from Derby, had a cardiac arrest after spraying the deodorant in her bedroom. Her parents have since become aware of other young people who accidentally died after inhaling deodorant. In response, the British Aerosol Manufacturers Association, BAMA, said deodorants have very clear warnings. By law, aerosol deodorants must be printed with the warning "keep out of reach of children." However, Georgia's parents said the writing was small. They believe many parents buy deodorant for their children without noticing the warning. People don't know how dangerous the contents of those tins can be, said her father Paul. I would like it so that no one else in the country or the world would end up having to go through what we've personally gone through. We don't want our daughter's death to be in vain. Georgia was autistic and her father said she liked to spray deodorant on blankets as she found the smell comforting. The smell of it gave her a certain sense of relaxation, said Mr. Green. If she was feeling in any way a little bit anxious, she would spray the spray and it would give her a sense of comfort because it's a deodorant my wife used. Georgia's older brother found her unresponsive in her bedroom on the 11th of May 2022. Her door was open so it wasn't as if it was an enclosed environment, said her father. The exact amount of deodorant isn't clear, but it would be more than you would normally spray. At some point her heart stopped as a result of breathing it in. An inquest was held into Georgia's death and the coroner recorded the conclusion as misadventure. Her medical cause of death was unascertained but consistent with inhalation of aerosol. According to the Office for National Statistics, ONS, deodorant was mentioned on 11 death certificates between 2001 and 2020. However, the actual number of deaths is likely to be higher than this due to the fact that specific substances are not always mentioned on death certificates. Georgia's death certificate referred to an inhalation of aerosol rather than deodorant. Butane, the main ingredient of Georgia's deodorant, was recorded as having been involved in 324 deaths between 2001 and 2020. Propane and isobutane, also in Georgia's deodorant, was mentioned in 123 and 38 deaths respectively. The ONS said the substances had been linked to a number of deaths, noting the inhalation of butane or propane gas can lead to heart failure. The Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, ROSPA, said a number of people had died after overspraying deodorants. Ashley Martin, public health advisor at ROSPA, said it's easy to assume they are completely safe and totally free from risk. The truth is they're not. Inhaling large quantities of aerosols, not just deodorants, can lead to a whole host of life-endangering scenarios, from blackouts and breathing difficulties to heart rhythm changes and sadly death. There's a common misconception that fatalities from aerosols only happen in a substance abuse scenario, but this is absolutely not true. We've seen a number of fatalities over recent years where children and young adults have oversprayed aerosols, from teenagers conscious of body odor to children seeking reassurance from familiar smells. Georgia's parents said they had come across some of these cases through their own research. They include 12-year-old Daniel Hurley, also from Derbyshire, who collapsed and died after spraying himself with deodorant in a bathroom. That was in 2008, but my daughter died in 2022, said Mr. Green. The awareness still isn't where it should be. More recently, 13-year-old Jack Wapple died in similar circumstances to Georgia in 2019. His inquest heard he sprayed deodorant if he felt anxious when his mother left the house as it smelled like her. What warnings are currently printed on aerosol deodorants? By law, aerosol deodorants must be printed with the warning "keep out of reach of children." Most aerosol deodorants also have a warning that says solvent abuse can kill instantly. This is not a legal requirement, but it's a recommendation by BAMA due to the risk of people inhaling aerosols to intentionally get high. Georgia's parents believe the warning should be changed to solvent use can kill instantly, because Georgia was not abusing deodorant. Aerosol deodorants must also contain instructions on their correct usage, which are written following risk assessments carried out by the manufacturer. For example, the instructions might say used in short bursts in well-ventilated places. If an aerosol deodorant is flammable, there must also be a warning about this. BAMA said in a statement, the British Aerosol Manufacturers Association takes very seriously any incident involving aerosols products, and we were deeply saddened to learn of the death of someone so young. As an industry association, we work with manufacturers to ensure that aerosols are made to the highest safety standards and are labelled with very clear warnings and usage instructions, and recommend that anyone using an aerosol does so in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. We also recommend applying a number of additional warnings and usage instructions beyond those required by regulation, and continue to review these to encourage the safe use of aerosols. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. A disabled woman who cannot afford to heat her home for more than 2 hours a day said she puts her cat down her jumper to keep warm. Sharon Hearn has been told she can no longer claim winter fuel discounts despite the cold limiting her mobility. She said even during December's cold spell, her home was only heated to 10 to 12 Celsius or 50 to 54 Fahrenheit. The UK government said warm home discount changes prioritise those most likely to struggle to heat their homes. Households are eligible if they're either on pension credit guarantee, a means-tested benefit, or on tax credits with an income below a certain threshold. Charity Scope estimates about 300,000 disabled people in Wales and England will not be eligible because of the changes. Miss Hearn, 50, from Newton Powys, is a part-time wheelchair user due to spinal cord damage, rheumatoid arthritis, and a brain injury. People in my condition do feel the cold a lot more, she said. Sitting in these conditions medications is making my arthritis worse and making my joints worse and making my mobility worse. At night and during the day, normally I have 3 to 4 blankets on. I normally have 2 jumpers on, 2 socks on, and I'm very lucky to have a cat because he's cold. I put him down my jumper and we sort of warm each other up. Her council house has an air source heat pump which takes warmth from the air outside to heat the home inside, but costs £8 per day to run. 2 hours, that's all I can afford, Miss Hearn said. I tend to get to hypothermic stage end of November, beginning of December. I will then be forced to put it on 2 hours a day, and even by March or April, I'm having bills of £500, £600, £700. If that's the case, if I have it on 24 hours a day, then how much is that going to equate to? Miss Hearn said she was told by the Warm Home Discount helpline she was no longer eligible because her bungalow has a D rating on its energy performance certificate. But the UK government's Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy disputed this, saying the WHD is not awarded according to the energy efficiency of the property but on people's financial circumstances. A spokesman added, "We are prioritising households most in need this winter, with over 3 million homes across Great Britain receiving an additional £150 energy bill discount through the Warm Home Discount. This will mean an extra 780,000 pensioners and low-income families will benefit this year compared to last." Alex Osborne from Disability Wales said the WHD was just a little bit of breathing space for disabled people. Not having the heating on 24/7 in their homes can make them really very unwell, so they're having to either take the risk they're going to get seriously ill by turning it off, or have it on and wonder how they're going to be able to afford the bills. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. Donald Trump will be allowed back to Facebook and Instagram after Meta announced it will be ending its 2-year suspension of his accounts. The ban will end in the coming weeks, the social media giant has said. In a statement, Nick Clegg, Meta's president of global affairs, said the public should be able to hear what their politicians are saying. The then US president was indefinitely suspended from Facebook and Instagram after Capitol riots in 2021. Meta had acted following Mr. Trump's praise for people engaged in violence at the Capitol, Mr. Clegg had said. The suspension was an extraordinary decision taken in extraordinary circumstances. He said a review had now found that Mr. Trump's accounts no longer represented a serious risk to public safety, but because of Mr. Trump's past violations, he would now face heightened penalties for any future violations. Meta's oversight board, a body it is set up to review moderation rulings, said the decision to reinstate Mr. Trump on its platform sat with Meta alone. The board did not have any role in the decision. The board had previously told Meta that Mr. Trump's suspension needed to be revisited. It urged Meta to be transparent and to provide additional information about new policies covering public figures so that it could review their implementation. Republicans have been pressing for Mr. Trump to be allowed back onto Facebook as he prepares to run for the US presidency again next year. Mr. Trump posted on his own social media company, Truth Social, in response on Wednesday, saying that Facebook had lost billions after banning your favourite president, me. Such a thing should never again happen to a sitting president or anybody else who is not deserving of retribution, he wrote. Donald Trump now has a decision to make. Truth Social, a social media platform he set up in 2021, has vastly fewer users than Facebook, which is 3 billion. Truth Social may have as many as 5 million accounts, though it's unlikely it has far fewer active users. However, Mr. Trump has an exclusive agreement with Truth Social. That means he is legally required to post first on the platform 6 hours before any other. It means if he posts on Facebook or Twitter, there is a chance he could get sued. Analysts also warn that if Mr. Trump were to stop using Truth Social or post content elsewhere, the platform would struggle to survive. He could simply ignore that exclusivity agreement and start posting content straight away. However, that could open him up to legal problems. What is also possible is that he simply waits until June when the agreement times out, or he could take the decision never to go back to platforms that he has been openly criticised for. However, if he is going to take that tilt, the White House being on Facebook, the world's biggest social media platform, would make a lot of sense. What happens next? The ball is firmly in Mr. Trump's court now. If he does decide to come back, though, he will still have to follow Meta's rules. The company has left the door open for another suspension if he flouts them. It means Mr. Trump will have to hold his tongue to a certain extent on Facebook in a way that he currently does not have to on Truth Social. News of Mr. Trump's reinstatement was quickly criticised by Democrats and some activists organisations who expressed concerns that he could again use the platform to repeat false claims that he won the 2020 election. Trump incited an insurrection, Californian Democratic Representatives Adam Schiff wrote on Twitter, giving him back access to a social media platform to spread his lies and is dangerous. Derek Johnson, the president of the NAACP, civil rights organisation, told the Associated Press they saw the move as a grave mistake that was a prime example of putting profits above people's safety. It's quite astonishing that one can spew hatred, fuel conspiracies, and incite a violent insurrection insurrection at our nation's Capitol building, and Mark Zuckerberg still believes that is not enough to remove someone from his platforms. But the American Civil Liberties Union, a not-for-profit organization that defends civil rights in the US, tweeted that decision was the right call. Twitter has also banned the former president following the 6th of January 2021 US Capitol riot, saying he had broken its rules on the glorification of violence. But in November, its new owner, Elon Musk, said Mr. Trump's account ban had been lifted after running a poll in which users narrowly backed the move. Mr. Trump has not yet returned to Twitter, having earlier said, "I don't see any reason for it." Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. The US economy did better than expected at the end of last year, despite higher borrowing costs and rising costs of living dragging on growth. The economy grew at an annual rate of 2.9% in the last 3 months of 2022, official figures show. That was down 3.2% in the previous quarter as home sales and construction tumbled. Some analysts are worried that the US economy is headed for recession, although the jobs market has held up. The unemployment rate is hovering around historic lows, but other parts of the economy have been weakening. In December, normally a big month for consumer spending, retail sales dropped 1.1% from a month earlier. Manufacturing has also suffered, while the stock market dropped sharply last year. Thursday's report showed housing investment, which is sensitive to interest rates, falling at an annual rate of nearly 27% in the 3 months to December, driven by declines in the construction of new homes. But consumer spending, the main driver of the US economy, continued at a solid, albeit slowing pace. For the full year, the economy grew by 2.1%. That was down from last year when the economy roared back to life after the pandemic, expanding by 5.9%, the fastest rate since 1984. That surge helped spark a rapid rise in prices, pushing the US central bank to intervene to try to stabilize costs. Last year, the Federal Reserve hiked interest rates from near zero to more than 4%, the highest rate in 15 years. By lifting borrowing costs, the bank is encouraging consumers to save more and spend less, hoping this will ease the pressures pushing up prices, but it risks triggering a severe slowdown, which could leave millions of people out of work. Fed officials have said they remain hopeful the economy can adjust without massive job losses, allowing the rate hiking campaign to end in a so-called soft landing instead. For almost a year, the Federal Reserve has been trying to achieve a soft landing by raising short-term interest rates, just enough to bring down inflation without causing a recession. It's clear the economy remains relatively strong in the face of the Fed's efforts, suggesting they're succeeding, said Rich Flynn, managing director at Charles Schwab UK. However, investors may fear that today's figures are somewhat deceiving, as other recent data has pointed towards a recession. Hello and welcome to News by Standards. More than 100 charities have written to Rishi Sunak calling for an end to housing child asylum seekers in hotels after about 200 went missing. The organisations warned the Prime Minister that children were at risk of exploitation, with one calling it a child protection scandal. There is concern children are being trafficked into criminal gangs. The government said it was determined to stop the use of hotels for all children. Commons leader Penny Mordaunt said there had been stories of gangmasters turning up at hotels and taking people away. It is very hard to protect vulnerable asylum seekers and it needs to be addressed, she told MPs. An unaccompanied asylum-seeking child is a person under the age of 18 who has become separated from both parents at the time of their asylum application. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick told MPs on Wednesday that of the 4,600 child asylum seekers without an adult who had arrived in the UK since 2021, 440 had gone missing and only half had returned. He said 13 of those who were missing were under the age of 16 and one was female. He clarified he had not seen evidence that children were being abducted, but said he was not going to let the matter drop. The government said almost 9 in 10 unaccompanied children in Home Office approved hotels were Albanian males who claimed to be 16 to 17 years old. Police sources said many had been trafficked by criminal gangs. Charities have raised fears that children disappearing from hotels are ending up in drug gangs or car washes. Dame Sarah Thornton, the UK's former independent anti-slavery commissioner, said it was known that organised crime groups targeted vulnerable children and asylum-seeking children were at great risk of exploitation and trafficking. My real fear is that the boys will be locked into cannabis farms, they might be working in county line drugs distribution, and the girls may be forced into sex work. Dame Sarah, who also had a long career as a police officer, the practice of keeping children in Home Office run hotels needs to stop. Speaking on BBC Radio 4's Today programme, she said, "You've got a lot of children in certain hotels. People know where they are, the traffickers know where they are. If they were living in supported foster homes, it would be so much harder for them to be preyed on in the way that is happening." The open letter, coordinated by children's rights organisation ECPAT UK and the Refugee Council and signed by more than 100 refugee and children's charities, including including the NSPCC and Barnardo's, condemned the government's failures to protect vulnerable children from harm. The government said there is no legal basis for placing children in a Home Office hotel accommodation, and almost 2 years into the operation of the scheme, which is both unlawful and harmful, it is no longer possible to justify the use of hotels as being temporary. The charities added that the Home Office had repeatedly failed to commit to an end date for the scheme. They have also called for an independent inquiry into the situation. Mr. Jenrick stressed that a shortage of alternative accommodation meant he could not set a date. Who is responsible for child asylum seekers? Under 18s travelling on their own are called unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. More than 3,000 child applicants were granted some form of protection in the year to September 2022. All UK local authorities are responsible for child asylum seekers in their area. They can transfer children to other areas when the capacity is stretched. Local authorities can receive up to £143 per night to accommodate each child. The Home Office says some children are in hotels because alternative accommodation is currently unavailable. Enver Solomon, Chief Executive of the Refugee Council, described the loss of dozens of refugees as a child protection scandal that must be urgently addressed. He said the equivalent of several classrooms of children had seemingly disappeared into the clutches of those who will exploit and abuse them. Labour's Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper also accused ministers of a dereliction of duty and claimed that there was a criminal network involved in taking children away from their accommodation. She told the BBC about 40% of the missing children had disappeared from one hotel and the government had done nothing about it. Caroline Lucas, Green MP for Brighton Pavilion, where a number of children are thought to have gone missing, accused the government of staggering complacency and compared the situation to girls being ignored in Rotherham, a reference to the widespread child sex abuse in the Yorkshire town. Sussex Police said 137 unaccompanied children had been reported missing since the Home Office began housing them in hotels in Brighton and Hove. On Wednesday night, a protest was held in Brighton by refugee groups demanding urgent action to give children seeking safety the protection they deserve. In a statement, the Home Office said the well-being of children and minors in our care is an absolute priority. Robust safeguarding procedures are in place to ensure all children and minors are safe and supported as we seek urgent placements with a local authority. Any child or minor going missing is extremely serious, and we work around the clock with the police and local authorities to urgently locate them and ensure they are safe. The statement added that the government was determined to stop the use of hotels for all minors and pointed out it was giving local authorities £15,000 for every unaccompanied child they take into their care. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. Leanne Francesca says her life has been transformed by the electric bike she started using during the pandemic. It's game-changing, claims the 31-year-old product manager who lives in Toronto, Canada. I wasn't a cyclist whatsoever before. Toronto isn't really a bike-friendly city, although it's getting better, but the pandemic meant it was empty of cars, and so I started biking a little. I now e-bike to see my friends to do my grocery shopping, and it enables me to arrive at the office non-sweaty. Surprisingly, the e-bike Miss Francesca is referring to isn't actually her own. Instead, she is one of a growing number of people on both sides of the Atlantic, renting their bikes long-term through a subscription model. Miss Francesca rents hers for 149 Canadian dollars, which is 112 US dollars or 91 pounds a month, through an e-bike rental company called Zig. For her, this generally means from March to October, pressing pause to avoid the harsh Canadian winter season when temperatures in Toronto can fall to below -30. Still, why rent? It's really expensive to buy an e-bike, she responds. They can be worth a few $1,000s, and I don't have the confidence to select which one to buy, and I'm not confident I could fix it if it went wrong. Instead, if anything stops working on her rented e-bike, then the hire firm repairs it. Over the past decade or so, we've seen a boom in short-term bike hire schemes as a way to navigate cities. First came docked bike systems, such as London Santander Cycles or Boris Bike scheme. These require you to remove a bike from a docking station and then return it to one. They were subsequently followed by bike and then e-bike and e-scooter hire schemes that did away with the need for the stations. Instead, you use an app to locate where the nearest bikes and scooters have been left at random spots on the nearby pavements by the previous users. Such has been the global growth of these dockless systems that they have long been criticised as a form of street litter. Putting aside this controversy, the business model of these street-side dockless and docked systems is that you hire the bike or scooter for a single journey, the half an hour or so that you need it for. By contrast, the new trend is that you hire a bike or e-bike for the long term by paying a monthly subscription fee. Zig Chief Executive Kevin McLaughlin launched the business in Toronto in 2020, followed by Vancouver last year. He now hopes to expand to other Canadian cities and across the US. In addition to serving members of the public, the firm also rents out the e-bikes to couriers and food delivery companies. The idea is to take an expensive asset worth around $4,000 US and give that to someone for around 150 Canadian dollars a month, and will take care of the hassle. We are trying to provide a way to move forward when it comes to climate change and traffic safety and urban transport. It's more environmentally beneficial if more people use bikes instead of cars. In London, Jean-Michel Chalaya hires a bike long-term from BuzzBike. The 36-year-old uses it to pedal all across the capital, from his home to his office to meetings in the city and to his weekly football games. Mr. Chalaya estimates that he cycles up to 50 kilometers or 31 miles a week. The founder of mobile beauty app Le Salon pays for it via the UK-wide Cycle to Work scheme, whereby £20 is deducted from his monthly pay packet. My other bike was second-hand and I got fed up of spending loads of money on maintenance all the time, plus I was never confident it wouldn't be stolen. This way I get a really good bike and I never stress too much about leaving it anywhere. If I have a problem with it, then I just message them and they come around and fix it when it's convenient for me. One of the pioneers of long-term bike subscription is Dutch company Swapfiets, which means swap bike. Launched in 2014, it now has 280,000 active users across 60 European cities, including Amsterdam, Vienna and London. Rentals start from £16.90 a month for a one-speed standard bike and from £59.90 for an e-bike, which now accounts for about 15% of its subscriptions. Sustainability is an angle now, but when we started, what we really wanted to do was solve the problem of bike ownership, which can create hassle due to the need for bike repairs if it's not maintained, said Swapfiets co-founder Richard Berger. If we can't repair the bike on site, we'll give you another one to get you on your way again. Who is their target audience? We do see a lot of expats that just want access quick to a bike and then drop it back when no longer needed 6 to 12 months later, says Mr. Berger, but we also have young professional students who hire for 3 or 4 years. It's not just adults who can join in long-term bike rental trend. London-based Bike Club is aimed at children aged from 4 to 12 and has 55,000 active members across the UK and Germany, where it recently launched. We realised that a kids subscription model made sense as they grow physically and need to have lots of different bikes, says co-founder Alexandra Rico Lloyd. When a family no longer needs a bike, they send it back and another family will get use of it. As it's serviced fully each time, it extends the lifespan of that bike. Bike Club offers 100 different styles of bike, which cost between £5 to £25 a month to rent. John Parkin, Professor of Transport Engineering at the University of West England, says the bike docking hire schemes helped enable the long-term subscription businesses to take off. This is because more people get used to both cycling and to using a bike that they didn't own. However, Professor Parkin, who is also Deputy Director of the University's Centre for Transport and Society, says a major challenge for the companies involved is the sheer capital expenditure of buying all the bikes in the first place. It's massive capital and it's burning capital, he says. I'm not sure where the profitability lies, as maintenance and moving them across cities is a massive cost, so keeping a lid on costs is probably a challenge for such companies. Zig's Mr. McLaughlin agrees it is difficult. It is a challenging time to grow a heavy assets business and raise capital, he says. As Zig and others in the sector are small private firms, they're not obliged to report their sales and profit figures. Still, the environmental benefits are huge. Professor Parkin adds any way of making cycling and cities more efficient rather than people moving around in big vehicles so they can get to their final destination easier is good news. Back in Toronto, Miss Francesca is looking forward to hiring her next bike once the Canadian winter is out the way. It's so much more convenient than going by car, and it feels nice riding through leafy neighbourhoods. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. Microsoft services have recovered after tens of thousands of users reported its products, including Outlook and Teams, had stopped working. The company tweeted that its impacted services had recovered and remained stable. Down Detector, which tracks website outages, showed dwindling numbers of users reporting problems. Microsoft blamed the outage on a change it made to its wide area network, which has now been resolved. In a statement, Microsoft explicitly ruled out a cyber attack as a potential cause of the issue. Wednesday's problems affected a range of widely used Microsoft products. Services including Teams and Xbox Live were also reported as not working. Microsoft said a cloud computing service Azure also experienced problems which affected a subset of users. The service provides computing power to many other businesses, some of which reported they were facing problems as a result. Many people and businesses will be breathing a sign of relief now Microsoft services have come back online. But for the thousands who lost access to services, it's been a significant inconvenience. It is also a reminder of how much so many of us rely on big tech to help us run our daily lives and our businesses with products we can't control when they go wrong. Systems and networks are always more vulnerable when maintenance or upgrades are underway, as there's more potential for the tiniest thing to either go wrong or not to plan, and the ripple effects, as we've seen today, can be widespread. Eurostar, for example, tweeted that it was having problems with its services as a result of the outage affecting Azure, a popular rival to Amazon Web Services and used by many big businesses for both storage and extra processing power. Reports of problems came in from many countries, with Down Detector receiving thousands of reports in India and Japan alone. But the impact seems to have been uneven and relatively modest, given the number of users of some of the affected systems. Microsoft Teams, for example, is used by more than 280 million people globally, primarily in business and schools, where it can be of critical importance for calls, meetings, and general service organizations. Some users shared memes celebrating an unexpected break from work or disappointment that their workplace teams seemed unaffected. As well as Teams and Outlook, the services affected, according to the Microsoft 365 status page, include SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, Microsoft Graph, Power BI, and Microsoft 365 Admin Center. The disruption came a day after Microsoft reported its sales rose only 2% in the 3 months to December to $52.7 billion or £42.8 billion, with overall profits falling by 12% to $16.4 billion. The slowdown in sales accounts for the corporation's smallest quarterly increase in more than 6 years. Meanwhile, on the 19th of January, Microsoft announced it would reduce its workforce by roughly 5%, eliminating 10,000 jobs. It is the latest round of staff redundancies to hit the tech industry and will cost the business $1.2 billion in severance and reorganization costs. Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. Twitter is being sued in Germany by two groups claiming the social network failed to remove 6 posts attacking Jewish people and denying the Holocaust after they were reported. The posts were published after billionaire Elon Musk bought the platform in October 2022, but his tweets, which now represent most of the company's communications output, have not mentioned the case. Anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial are illegal in Germany. They also violate Twitter's own terms and conditions. Twitter has betrayed our trust, said Avital Grinberg, the president of the European Union of Jewish Students, EUJS, which has brought the civil action alongside Hate Aid. By allowing hateful content to spread, the company fails to protect users and Jewish people in particular. The case will try to determine whether Twitter is contractually obliged to remove such hatred and such material. Hate Aid legal head Josephine Ballan said Twitter assures it won't tolerate violence on its platforms. Users have to be able to rely on that. In 2021, before Mr. Musk bought Twitter, the campaign against anti-Semitism with which it had partnered said the company's policies were failing and it had removed only 400 of 1,000 tweets containing hateful content attacking Jewish people. The previous year, Twitter was criticised as too slow to remove tweets by UK musician Wiley that he later apologised for saying they were looked at as anti-Semitic. Boris Johnson, then Prime Minister, said social media networks needed to go further and faster to remove content like this. Other big social networks, including Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, have faced similar accusations. Under the UK Online Safety Bill, technology companies would face large fines for failing to swiftly remove hateful content. Culture Secretary Michelle Doman hopes the bill will be passed into law this summer.